Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week's Torah portion is called Yitro, or Jethro. It's perhaps one of the preeminent Torah portions throughout the entire Torah. This is the portion in which we find Moses climbing or ascending to the top of Mount Sinai and getting the 10 commandments from God. Perhaps one of these most important occasions throughout our history and recorded in the Torah. Yet there's so many other wonderful aspects of this portion as well. As the portion begins, the Israelites have come out of Egypt, and Moses' father-in-law, Yitro, or Jethro in English, comes to meet him. And with him, he brings Moses' wife, Zipporah, his daughter, and his sons. This is amazing that this week's Torah portion is named for someone who's not an Israelite, not a Jew, Yitro, Moses' father-in-law. You know, growing up, Moses really never had a father figure. Amram, his father, and his mother, Yocheved, placed him in the basket and floated him down the Nile River to save him. And he was recovered there, as we know, from Pharaoh by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in Pharaoh's household, where Pharaoh was probably a very distant, removed grandfather figure. So Moses never had a father figure. Jethro, for him, was that father figure. When he runs away from Egypt and he lives his life as a shepherd, and he meets Jethro, and he meets Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and marries Zipporah, we come to see the relationship between Moses and Jethro clearly grow. For when Jethro comes to greet Moses, they embrace. And what does Jethro do? Jethro gives Moses some wonderful advice. Moses is faced with this enormous task of listening to all of the Israelites, their difficulties, their problems, their grievances and disagreements, and judging between individuals. And Jethro comes up with this wonderful advice to Moses. Moses, you're going to wear yourself out, so create courts. Find good, dependable, discerning people of wisdom that can listen and judge these small cases and keep the most important ones, keep the big ones for you. And what does Moses do? Moses heeds the advice of his father-in-law, Jethro. So clearly, Moses respects him. And what clearly we can learn is that advice can come from all kinds of quarters. And we should be open to hearing, listening, and receiving advice from others. It doesn't have to come only from Israelites, doesn't have to come from a certain group of people only. Be open to advice. Clearly Moses was, and Jethro gave him his advice. So that begins the portion. We also learn in the portion how God tells Moses that the Jewish people have to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We have a special role to live amongst the world as this chosen people. Again, I always like to tell people I never believe that being chosen means superiority. It just means different. God has given us different obligations and responsibilities. And I think that those responsibilities include being a light unto other nations through living our lives through the mitzvot, the commandments, because that's the next thing that happens in this portion. Moses ascends Mount Sinai and God gives to him the 10 commandments. So in preparation for the giving of the commandments, God instructs Moses and the Israelites to create a boundary around Mount Sinai. The Israelites were not supposed to cross this boundary. So we learn about the importance of boundaries to holiness. And that indeed is a very important issue in our portion, and something I'd like to take a moment and focus on with you. It's a good basic rule of religious life. Everything has boundaries for the holy. We can understand in traditional Judaism that, and by Jewish law, that there are boundaries for us as Jews in how to live. God has given us boundaries in terms of what we can and can't do on Shabbat, what we are supposed to or not supposed to eat vis-a-vis kashrut, keeping kosher. There are all kinds of laws applicable to Jews in how to live a religiously observant life. And this is how our fellow Jews in the Orthodox and many in the conservative movement live their lives. While we as Reformed Jews don't believe in the same obligatory status of ritualistic law, nonetheless, I think that there's also boundaries in how we live our lives in relation to each other. In fact, all we have to do is look at these 10 commandments. Let me review them with you for a moment. The first commandment, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Number 2, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness. And number 10, you shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. If we look at these 10 commandments and we think about the issue of boundaries and holiness, in a ritual world, there's only one commandment that applies here, and that's the 4th commandment, to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And how do we do that? Through these boundaries of traditional Jewish law that tell us what we can or cannot do on Shabbat. But what about all the other 9 commandments? Are these commandments that deal with ritual and religious observance? Not really. These are commandments that deal with morality and ethics. What we might learn from this is that there are boundaries in how we live our lives as human beings, as individuals, as a society. And we can see right now, by looking at these 10 commandments, these other 9, that our world is indeed struggling. We can talk about you shall not murder, and we see violence and we see the threat of murder that happened in the Capitol riots. We see you shall not steal, and yet we see people looting and riots and violence. You shall not bear false witness, and yet we see a leadership in this country that has chosen to exaggerate, misrepresent, bear false witness in terms of what has gone on in this country. We have seen wildly vivid stories, conspiracy theories about elections, about Jewish lasers that start fires. We see a gamut of behavior that currently exists within our society that runs contrary to bearing false witness, or you should not bearing false witness, as the commandment tells us. We shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor. I think too many people right now in leadership positions covet that role of power. And this is on both sides of the aisle, everyone wanting power instead of wanting to do what's best for our nation and our society. Friends, there are boundaries to holiness, not only in Jewish practice and in Jewish rituals, but in moral, ethical behavior, and how we as human beings are supposed to act toward one another. I pray that we should be able to learn the lesson from this week's Torah portion of Yitro and understand that there are boundaries, understand that we are obliged to be this kingdom of priests in this holy nation. We must be a role model of how to live life morally and ethically with proper boundaries within our behavior, with one another and in our society, that will lead others to see this beautiful example and live by it as well. If we could start with one small ripple in the pond of telling truth to power, of seeking only the good, not for ourselves, but for one another, then maybe that ripple will slowly expand and our society will find a way to heal and a way indeed to prosper, allowing us to all find the moral and ethical imperative of respect for one another. I pray that all of us might be like Yitro, who can provide advice to people. And may we all be like Moses, who can listen to others and then find the courage to act for the betterment of his community. And we might act for the betterment of ours. Take care. Shabbat Shalom.